Imagine a country disappearing not through a war, but through a vote at the ballot box. That's the debate quietly gaining steam in the Balkans right now. It's about a possible union between Kosovo and Albania, and what sounded like a nationalist fantasy just a few years ago is now showing up in interviews, parliamentary debates, and official speeches. Why now? And how realistic is any of this, really? Let's start with the basics. Kosovo declared independence in 2008. More than 15 years later, one crucial thing is still missing: full international recognition. Serbia rejects it outright. So do several EU member states. And without that recognition, UN membership stays out of reach too. So Kosovo is technically a state, but one stuck in a kind of permanent holding pattern. To understand why the unification idea is picking up steam again, it helps to look back. When the Ottoman Empire collapsed in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the Albanian state emerged in 1912, but not along ethnic lines. Its borders were drawn to suit the political interests of Europe's great powers at the time. Large Albanian populated areas were left outside those borders. Kosovo was the most significant of them, absorbed instead into Serbia and later Yugoslavia. That decision still echoes today. More than 90% of Kosovo's population is ethnically Albanian. Same language, same culture, close family ties across the border. Many people don't see that border as something that grew naturally. They see it as an accident of history. Tensions between Serbs and Albanians boiled over in the 1990s as Yugoslavia fell apart. NATO eventually intervened militarily in 1999, Kosovo came under international administration, and in 2008 it declared independence. For many Kosovars, a historic moment, but not a finish line, more like the opening of a new unresolved chapter. Because at the time, the international community explicitly did not want a second Albanian state. It wanted an independent, multi-ethnic Kosovo, not a stepping stone toward union with Albania. Still, the idea never fully disappeared. Polls have shown for years that a significant share of the population in both countries is open to unification. And Prime Minister Albin Kurti, in power for years now, has never really hidden that this is a goal of his, even though his day-to-day politics focus on economic reform and fighting corruption. In late 2025, Kurti's party won the strongest election result in independent Kosovo's history. In February 2026, Parliament re-elected him as head of government. In interviews, he's been blunt about it. If there were ever a referendum on unification with Albania, he'd personally vote yes. At the same time, he's made clear he'd actually prefer all 6 Western Balkan states joining the EU together, rather than a purely bilateral union. And that gets us to the real question. Why is this topic exploding right now of all times? Part of the answer is sheer patience running out. Serbia keeps blocking recognition. EU enlargement has barely moved, partly because member states like France have been putting on the brakes for years. And there's a newer source of uncertainty on top of that. Under the Trump administration, the US, Kosovo's traditional protector, suddenly looks a lot less predictable, especially in a region where Washington has played a stabilizing role for decades. For a country with only partial recognition to begin with, that's an unsettling development, even though nowhere else in Europe is pro-American sentiment stronger than here. Against that backdrop, closer ties with Albania look, to many people, like a way out of the dead end. Albania doesn't share Kosovo's legitimacy problems. It's a NATO member, broadly recognized, and moving, however slowly, toward EU membership. The logic that Kosovo could edge closer to Europe by getting closer to Albania isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. But between that idea and actually pulling it off sit some serious obstacles. The first is purely legal. Kosovo's constitution explicitly rules out merging with another state. Changing that would need broad political majorities, and a fierce debate over whether to give up hard-won statehood just as it was finally secured. Second, there's the personal dimension. Kurti and Albania's Prime Minister, Edi Rama, are not exactly known for warm relations. The two have different ideas about what a joint state would even look like and who'd be running it, a question that turns out to be surprisingly stubborn in practice. But the biggest resistance comes from outside. The US has made clear it opposes both a greater Albania and a greater Serbia. The EU worries that any border shift in the Balkans could trigger a chain reaction and other unresolved conflicts across the region. Serbia would almost certainly treat a union as an open provocation, and even North Macedonia and Greece, both home to Albanian minorities of their own, react nervously to anything that smells like redrawn borders. So, what's actually left if unification is politically almost impossible, but the desire for closer ties isn't going anywhere? For many observers, the answer isn't a new map, it's Brussels. Inside the European Union, national borders lose most of their practical weight anyway. Anyone who's crossed from Germany into Austria without so much as slowing down at a checkpoint knows how little a border can mean once both sides share the same internal market. That same model could be the more workable path for Kosovo and Albania too. Not a formal merger, but an economic and political relationship so tight that the border eventually stops mattering much at all. That's also why both governments have so far leaned toward gradual convergence rather than a dramatic political leap. Open borders, shared infrastructure projects, deeper security cooperation. All of that is already happening. No constitutional change required. Some call it integration without unification. The talk of formal union, meanwhile, mostly functions as political leverage, a promise held in reserve in case the European path eventually collapses for good. So whether real unification ever happens depends less on Pristina or Tirana, and more on whether Brussels is finally willing to offer the Western Balkans a credible European future. Leave that door closed, and the temptation to look for national alternatives will only keep growing. So, what do you think? Should the Western Balkans be brought into the EU faster? And how realistic do you think a Kosovo-Albania union actually is? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next deep dive into geopolitics and history. Thanks for watching. See you next time.